Snow blew sideways through the cottonwood groves, turning the hills into a quiet, breathless world. The wind moved like memory, soft at first, then cruel, dragging ash and frost in the same long sigh. And through it walked a woman, her hem stiff with soot, her boots split at the seams, her eyes tracking something that didn't exist anymore. Marble Jameson didn't flinch when the snow stung her cheeks. She'd walked miles since dawn, past wagons that didn't slow, through towns where windows shuddered when she passed. Her hands were red with cold, her knuckles cracked, but it wasn't the winter that had hardened her. It was the silence of too many nights with no name spoken, no warmth offered. A widow without land, without children, and worst of all, without pity. She reached the outskirts of the town just as the last bell rang for the evening prayer. It echoed over the roofs like a warning. The sign above the general store swung loose in the wind. Smoke lifted from chimneys, but no one stood outside. This was not a place that welcomed late arrivals. She tightened her shawl and stepped over the frozen wheel ruts into town. Two boys playing with a hoop glanced up, saw her soot-lined skirt and limp wind-chapped hair, and ran inside their porch. A dog barked once, then ducked under a rail. By the time she reached the general store, she knew better than to hope. Still, she pulled the door open with slow fingers and stepped inside. Warmth rushed her like a slap. The scent of flour, cinnamon, old wood, a fat pot-belly stove near the back. Mrs. Tibbet stood behind the counter, counting matches into a tin. She didn't look up. Marble cleared her throat. "Ma'am, I'm not here to beg, just wondering if you needed help. I can sweep, fold cloth, or just a chair by the stove till the snow stops." The old woman looked up. Her gaze ran over Marble like a judge assessing a thief. "I remember you," she said. "Jameson's wife from the ridge near Stony Ford." Marble nodded once. "Burned down, didn't it? Heard you lost everything, even the baby." Marable's jaw didn't move. "Well," Mrs. Tibbet said, shrugging, "God sends his fire where he pleases." Marble didn't reply, just turned and stepped back into the cold. Behind her, the door clicked shut. She walked toward the church. Her boots caught on uneven stones, the wind pulling hard now. By the time she reached the steps, she couldn't feel her fingers. She tried the door, walk. She leaned against the rail, pulling her arms around her body. The bell tower loomed above her, casting long shadows on the snow. She didn't cry, not anymore. Her tears had dried with the ashes of her homestead. She didn't beg either. She just stood there, letting the cold take what it wanted. Then a sound, soft pattering like rabbits skimming snow. She turned. Two girls stood near the edge of the square. Barefoot, tangled hair, coats too thin for the season. Twins maybe 6. One had a wooden button clutched in her fist. The other held a string with a broken locket. They stared. Marble stared back. "Are you hungry?" The louder one asked. Marble blinked. The girl came closer, tugging her sister behind. "You look like someone who doesn't have a porch." "No," Marble said. "I don't." The quieter twin reached out, touched the hem of her dress. Her fingers came back black. The louder twin squinted. "What's that? Soot, like from a fire?" "Yes." "Was it yours?" Marble opened her mouth. Closed it. "Yes." The quiet twin suddenly stepped forward and hugged her. Just like that, as if she knew something grown-ups had forgotten. The louder one said, "You want a home, don't you?" Marble looked away. I want a place to be still." The girl nodded gravely. "We don't got a mama, but our pawn needs a bride. We were waiting to find one." Waiting, Marble asked, unsure if she was being mocked or invited into a dream. "I don't say much, but we know what's missing. And you look like someone who needs someone." Marble's knees felt weak, not from cold, but from the strange weight of that sentence. Need wasn't something she'd let herself feel lately. The quiet twin tugged her hand. "Come, we'll show you our place. I don't even know your names." The louder one grinned. "I'm June. She's Josie." Marble looked toward the church, still locked, still cold. Then back to the twins. They were barefoot, but they weren't shivering. She followed. They led her through town, down a lane that twisted between cottonwoods heavy with snow, past a rail fence mended with rope, to a weathered house with smoke curling faintly from the chimney. The porch sagged, the barn leaned, but there was light in the windows and a rocking chair left half swaying in the wind. Josie climbed the porch and knocked twice. June pointed proudly. That's ours. A P built it with Mama before she died." No answer came from within. June didn't seem concerned. She pushed the door open. We brought a bride. Marble nearly turned and ran. Her boots gripped the snow like anchors. Inside warmth, the smell of stew, a table worn to round edges, a shelf of small carved animals, and in the far corner a man rose from a bench, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. A scar split his left brow, his eyes locked on Marble. Not suspicious, not startled, just still. The girl scampered past him. Josie climbed into a rocker, and June threw herself onto a bare skin by the fire. The man looked at Marable and tipped his head once. Not a nod, not a welcome, just acknowledgement. "This is the widow," John explained. "She's got ash on her skirt and sadness in her boots." Marble almost laughed. He gestured to the chair by the fire. She moved slowly toward it. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. But as she sat, the warmth soaked into her bones like something holy. Her fingers tingled back to life. Her eyes burned, not from smoke, but from the ache of kindness too sudden to bear. He set a bowl of stew near her and walked away. Later, when the girls had fallen asleep, tangled in each other's arms, Marble rose to leave. He blocked the door, not aggressively, just there. "You got somewhere better?" he asked, voice rough as gravel under river water. "No." "Then stay until you do." She hesitated. "You don't know me. Neither did my wife at first." Something cracked in her chest. She looked away, shame rushing in like a tide. "I can't give you what she gave." He looked down at her for a long, quiet moment, then said, "Wasn't asking for that." She blinked. He stepped aside. "Room's there." He pointed to a door near the hearth. She turned to thank him, but he was already gone. Back to the bench, back to his carving knife and a half-shaped pony in his hands. She stepped into the room. It smelled of cedar and soap. A single blanket on the cot folded tight. A picture of water slightly warm. Someone had thought ahead. She didn't sleep. She lay still and listened to the creak of the chair outside, the soft murmurs of dreaming girls, the low sigh of a man trying to shape silence into something useful. In the morning, she rose before the sun and found her boots cleaned, the ash gone. She sat on the porch with the cold biting her skin again, but this time she didn't feel hollow. She watched the girls chase chickens through the yard. The man came out and leaned against the post beside her. "I'll fetch wood," he said. She nodded. He paused. "You know how to make bread." "I did once. Could teach the girls if you're staying." She nodded again. Then, voice soft as a wind-broken fence, she asked, "What's your name?" "Call." He didn't ask for hers. She watched him walk toward the barn. Then June called from behind her, holding out a stick of whittled wood. "We made you a dog. It don't bark, but it stays." Marble knelt and took the carving. The dog had no eyes, no legs, just a shape meant to be loyal. She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a guest in her own story. Marble rose with the sun, though her sleep had been shallow and sparse. Morning light filtered through a crooked pane, golden where it struck the wooden floor and silver where it touched the frostbed glass. Her breath clouded before her. The warmth from the hearth hadn't reached this room, but she didn't mind the cold. It was clean. It didn't lie. She smoothed her skirt with calloused fingers and stepped barefoot into the main room. The cabin creaked like a ship and dock, old bones groaning, settling. She found Colt already up, a kettle warming on the stove and steam curling above his broad shoulders like breath from a beast. He hadn't shaved, hadn't spoken, just moved with the same quiet certainty as a man who'd done without applause most of his life. He nodded once, then set a dented tin cup beside her. Coffee, bitter, black warm. The twins came padding in soon after, hair askew and full of sleep. Josie climbed onto the bench and tucked her feet under her, while June began brushing out her sister's knots with a carved bone comb. Colt glanced at Marble but said nothing. Then he picked up his coat, pulled on his hat, and stepped outside into the cold with an axe in his hand. The door shut behind him like a promise left half-made. Marble didn't ask where he'd gone. She washed the cups, warmed leftover stew, and swept the ashes from the hearth. The girls watched her as if watching someone draw borders in invisible ink, uncertain if the lines meant permanence or just another goodbye. "Do you know how to braid?" June asked suddenly. "I do. Can you do ours?" Papa's braids hurt. Josie nodded solemnly in agreement, so Marble sat behind them, gently pulling through their tangles, murmuring nonsense stories she didn't remember learning, just ones that rose from somewhere deep. The girls giggled. Josie leaned into her lap like it was the only place the wind couldn't find her. When Colt returned, he paused in the doorway, just long enough for Marble to feel the weight of his watching. She didn't turn. He didn't speak, but later she found her boots still near the hearth, freshly oiled and stitched at the side with a new thread of deer sinew. He hadn't asked her to stay, but he was preparing for it. That evening, she offered to cook. The girls clapped. Colt only moved aside. In the pantry, she saw his late wife's apron still hanging on the hook. Worn cotton, once white, now softened to cream with years of use and wood smoke. She didn't touch it. She used a towel instead. The stew she made wasn't perfect. Too thin, a little salt heavy, but the girls devoured it and Colt ate in silence. Afterward, while the girls cleared the dishes, Marble stood at the window. Outside, the wind had gentled. Snow clung to every branch like lace. "Was your wife kind?" she asked quietly, not facing him. A long silence. Yes. She didn't ask more. He didn't offer. That night, she dreamt of a house where the windows didn't rattle and the fire didn't go out. The next morning, she heard hammering. She stepped outside to find Colt mending the portrail. He moved methodically, not wasting motion. His coat was thrown over the railing. The scar over his left brow caught the light, pale against sunburned skin. Marble approached slowly. "I can help," she said. He looked at her, then handed her a nail. They worked side by side, silent, except for the soft rhythm of hammer to wood. It felt like building something, though she couldn't name what. By mid-afternoon, her palms were blistered. "You're not used to work," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "I've worked, just not for anyone who noticed." He gave the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. It might have been a smile. She thought she might have liked it. That night, when the girls had gone to bed, she sat by the fire, threading patches onto one of Colt's shirts. The buttons were mismatched. She didn't ask if that was his doing or his wife's. Colt came in, wiping his hands with a cloth. He stood for a long moment, staring at the shirt in her lap. "You don't have to," he said. "I know. I didn't ask. I know." He nodded, then sat across from her and resumed whittling a horse from a block of oak. Time passed like molasses over a cold plate. Slow, sweet, sticky. The girls woke crying that night. Nightmares. Josie clung to Marble's neck while June sobbed into her arm. Colt stood at the door, helpless. "I can sit with them," Marble whispered. He gave a tight nod. She rocked the girls until they calmed, humming a song with no words. They fell asleep beside her. She didn't move. In the morning, she woke in their bed. Both twins curled against her sides, warm and breathing softly. Colt brought in firewood, but didn't speak. He left an extra blanket on the back of the chair. That day, she made bread. It wasn't perfect. It split at the top and cooked too fast, but the girls tore off pieces with glee. Even Colt ate it. She found a jar of honey and let the girls dip the crusts. "Should we call you Mama?" June asked. Honey stuck to her chin. Marble froze. Colt glanced over, sudden and sharp. Josie just said, "You smell like home." Marble's voice caught, then steadied. Maybe just Marble for now. They nodded unbothered. Later that week, she rode to town with Colt in the wagon. "You said little." Silence wasn't awkward, just space they hadn't filled yet. At the general store, Mrs. Tibbet saw them together, her mouth twisted like an old rope. "Well," she said loud enough for the others inside to hear. "That was quick, wasn't it?" Marble stood still. Colt reached for a sack of flour. "You do chores now for a man who won't even say your name." The old woman continued, smiling like vinegar. Colt didn't speak. Marble looked at him. Something flickered in his eyes, but he turned back toward the sacks. That silence, that absence of defense was worse than the words. They rode home wordless. That evening, she sat outside while the fire crackled behind her. Colt approached slowly, stood beside the post. I didn't answer her, he said. No, I should have. She said nothing. I didn't think it mattered. She looked at him. Then his eyes were darker than the night. I've been a name no one spoke before, she said quietly. It matters. He didn't apologize. But the next morning, he was already in the kitchen when she woke. Marable, he said, we're out of flour. She blinked. I'll ride with you, he added. Something in her yeast. That afternoon, he set up a second cot in the girls' room. Winter's still long, he said. She understood. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a space, a place to belong without expectation. The girls insisted on showing her the root cellar, their secret treasure cave. It was only a dug-out hole with shelves of pickled beans and onions, but they spoke of it like magic. Josie gave her a chipped button as a token. Jun swore it would keep away nightmares. Marble kept it in her apron pocket. That night, after tucking them in, she returned to the fire to find Cold carving again. He didn't look up. I've got nothing to offer you, she said softly. He glanced at her. You sit with them when they're scared. She nodded. You cook meals that don't taste like pine tar. That made her smile. He set the carving down. A rough bird, wings half spread. Not finished, but already beautiful. They need a woman who stays, he said. They'll get hurt if I leave, then stay. Her breath caught. I don't want to be another ghost in their house, she said. You're not. He stood and handed her the bird. I make these to give the girls something that won't break easy. She turned the carving in her hands. It was solid, rough, but honest. Maybe I'm not easy, she whispered. He didn't answer, but he reached over and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered a moment too long, then dropped. He stepped away. She stood alone by the fire, holding the bird, and for the first time she wondered if a man who spoke so little might still be capable of saying everything that mattered. Spring didn't come to the plains and blossoms. It crept in slow through mud and melt, revealing brittle grass beneath retreating snow, and the smell of damp earth in the wind. The sky lost its cruel gray for a gentler blue, and the chickens laid more often, but the thaw brought more than crocuses. It brought wagons, visitors, voices, and with them gossip like ice that cracks long after the storm has passed. Marble hung laundry on the sagging line behind the McCree house, her fingers pink from the cold bucket. The shirts flapped like flags on a battlefield she hadn't chosen. In the silence between gusts, she could hear it again. That name hers in someone else's mouth, said not like it belonged, but like it was being tested, weighed for shame. She turned to see the girls running barefoot through the thought patches of yard, chasing a straw dolls had named with a name Marble couldn't pronounce. Their laughter lifted into the breeze like something holy, but it didn't carry far enough to drown the whisper she'd heard in town the day before. She's not even kin. Mrs. Tibbet had hissed to the sheriff loud enough for the butcher's wife to hear. What right has she to raise those girls? She burned down her own home, and now she's curling up inside someone else's. Sheriff Vernon, a man whose backbone had long since been softened by pie and politics, had shrugged. Ain't no law against kindness. No, Mrs. as Tibet had replied. But there's a difference between kindness and keeping a man warm without a ring. The words echoed now hours later, long after the door of the general store had closed behind her. Long after Colt had silently accepted the sack of flour from her hands and not asked why she'd come back pale and stiff. She shook out his shirt, pinned it to the line, and turned toward the house. The girls were dragging sticks toward the barn, claiming they were building a castle. Marble went inside. Colt was by the stove mending a boot sole. He looked up once, then backed down. She crossed the room, wiped her hands, then hesitated. Do you think the town minds that I'm still here? He didn't answer right away. Then town minds everything. I heard Mrs. Tibbet talking to the sheriff. I know. Marble swallowed. She said I didn't belong. You set the boot down. Do you want to go? No. Then stay. It should have been enough, but it wasn't because something inside her, something bent but not broken, wanted not just shelter, but dignity, not just a roof, but a place no one could say she hadn't earned. The next morning, the twins fought in front of the post office. Marble wasn't there. Colt was tying a crate to the wagon. Josie had told a neighbor boy That Marble braided their hair better than his mama. The boy said Marble wasn't a mama, just someone their pa was too sad to send away. June had pushed him. Art. He pushed back. Then Josie bit his hand. By the time Colt broke it up, the boy's father was shouting. The general store's window was half open, and a small crowd had gathered to stare at the girls like they were holding matches near kerosene. Later that day, the sheriff rode up to the McCree porch. Marble was mending a torn blanket. Colt met the lawman by the steps. Sheriff Vernon scratched his mustache, not looking her way. Just talking, Colt, but folks saying your girls got wild that they need a woman with. He hesitated with standing. Colt didn't reply. Sheriff tried again. Not that she ain't doing her best, but you understand. Marable stood carefully folding the blanket. I do. Colt turned to her. There was something sharp in his jaw, but he said nothing. Sheriff tipped his hat and rode off. Inside, the girl sat silent on the floor. Josie had been crying. Marble crouched beside her, pulled her into her lap. June whispered, "Are we bad?" "No," Marble said. "You're good, even when others don't understand you." Josie murmured, "They said you weren't ours." Marble felt something split behind her ribs. Not pain, something older. Shame and the urge to flee it. "I'm not your mama," she said softly, "but I'm here and I want to be." That night after the girls had gone to bed, she stepped out onto the porch where Colt was oiling the hinges of the barn lantern. "The sheriff came," she said. He nodded. "They think I'm in your house for your comfort." He didn't speak. She looked at the horizon, dusky with a thin blue line where the last light bled. "I need to know," she said, "what I am here." Colt set the lantern down. "You make the girls laugh. You keep the stove warm. You bring things back to life. But I'm not your wife." He looked at her. "No, and you don't intend to ask." He was quiet for a long time. "Would you say yes?" he asked. She blinked. "If I did." He picked up the lantern again, turned the wick, and let the light glow between them like an unspoken thing. "Not yet," she said. "I'm still trying to remember who I am when no one's watching." He nodded once. "That's fair." He stepped back inside, leaving the door open. Marble sat on the porch a long while. 2 days later, she took the wagon to town alone. Colt had work to finish, and she offered to fetch sugar and needles. She kept her chin up as she walked boardwalk. Eyes followed her, slow and narrow. At the store, Mrs. Tibbet barely looked up. Marble asked for needles, flour, and a small jar of licorice drops for the girls. Mrs. Tibbet rang up the items, then paused, tapping her fingers on the wood. "Some say you're pretending." Marble didn't respond. "Some say you're hoping for a wedding you won't get." Marble met her eyes. "Some say a lot." The old woman sniffed. "Children need truth." Marble's voice was low but clear. "Children need safety, and someone who doesn't leave when the talking starts." The room quieted. The boy bagging goods stared at the counter. Marble paid, turned, and left. The next morning she found the girls in the barn painting the side of the feed barrels with mud and chalk. Josie had drawn stick figures, 4 of them hand in hand. One had wild hair, another had big boots, one had a scar on its head, the last had buttons drawn where a heart might be. Marble touched it gently. "She's you," Josie said. "That's why we gave her the buttons, so she don't fall apart." That night, Marble found Colt sitting by the fire with the same quiet knife in hand, whittling a new bird. "I went to town," she said. "I heard. I stood up for myself." He didn't look up. "That's so." She waited. He looked over. "How'd it feel? Like I belong more here than I ever will there." He nodded, then said, "The girls painted you." "They did. They see what's true." She stepped closer. "Do you?" He set the knife down. "I see a woman who's still choosing. That counts more than anything whispered behind your back." She sat beside him. "You could say things louder, you know." He shrugged. "Quiet words last longer." She smiled. Then, "You ever think you could love again?" He didn't answer, but he handed her the bird. It had a crooked wing, but it fit in her palm like it had waited for her all along. The storm came with no warning. A sky that had been soft and pale all morning turned to iron by noon. The wind picked up like an old grudge, snapping at shutters and tugging at the laundry line. Chickens scattered. The twins ran toward the barn with their arms full of dolls and dry corn. Colt was already hauling buckets inside when the first flakes started to fall, wet and heavy, sticking to the ground like regret. Marble gathered the blankets off the line, her fingers raw and quick. She could smell the cold coming, sharp as iron and pine. the kind that silenced everything but memory. Girls inside. She asked as Colt passed her on the porch. He nodded, but Josie lost something. Keep saying she dropped it by the creek. Marble's breath hitched. Is she out there now? Colt looked up. The barn door slammed shut in the wind. June came running. She said she was just looking. She said she'd be back before the snow stuck. Colt's face changed, not panic, but something tighter, something deeper. I'll find her, Marble said, already grabbing her shawl. I'll go. She shook her head. She ran because she thought I'd be mad. She needs my voice. Colt hesitated, then pulled a lantern off its hook and lit it. His fingers brushed hers as he passed it over. By the split cedar tree, he said. That's where they play most. The wind roared like it didn't want her to go. She went anyway, down the trail. The snow came sideways, sticking to her lashes, soaking her hem. The trees blurred into one another, their branches whispering old warnings. Her boots slipped on the mud beneath the powder. She held the lantern high, its glow a trembling orb in the gray. Jossie, she shouted, but the wind stole the name. She reached the creek, shallow and half-frozen. Beside it, under the twisted cedar, a small shape huddled behind a rock. Marble ran. Josie sat hugging her knees, her cheeks blotched red, her braid full of snow. I dropped the carving, she said. The bird you gave me. I looked and looked. Marble knelt and pulled the girl into her arms. You're worth more than any carving. Don't you ever think I'd trade you for a thing? Josie clung to her like a branch in flood water. I didn't want to lose the thing you touched. Marable stood lifting her. We allel make another. She turned back, but the trail had already vanished beneath the snow. The wind had swallowed the world whole. She tightened her grip and walked. By the time they reached the house, her legs burned and her fingers had gone numb. Colt opened the door before she knocked. He didn't speak. He took Josie into his arms and looked at Marble like she'd brought him his own heart. She peeled off her coat and stood dripping on the rug. June came running. You found her? She's safe, Marble said. Josie stirred. She came for me. She always will, Colt said. The fire roared, blankets wrapped. The storm thickened, and in the warmth, silence filled the room. Not heavy, not cold, but the kind of silence that holds gratitude without needing to speak it. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep beneath quilts and dreams, Marble sat beside the hearth, her dress drying in waves of heat. Her feet etched, her shoulders throbbed. Colt brought her a mug of cider. She took it, hands shaking only slightly. Why'd she go alone? He asked. She didn't want to disappoint me, Marble said. He nodded slowly. She thought the bird meant something more than it did. It did, Colt said. It was the first thing I made since Mary passed. Marble looked down into the steam. I didn't know that. Didn't need to. She held the cup tighter. I never got to bury anything. The fire took all of it. No headstone, no name on a fence post, just ashen silence. Colt looked at her brow furrowed gently. I'm not sure what to be here, she added. Not a wife, not a mother, not even a helper folks respect. You're here, Colt said. That's enough, she smiled faintly. I don't think it is. He reached for something behind the mantel, a box, small, wooden, smooth with age. I was keeping this for when I thought I'd know what to say, he said. He opened it. Inside a single folded ribbon, a locket, and a small bundle of names written in a child's shaky hand. Jun tried to spell Marble last week. He said it felt like a name that stayed. Marble picked up the paper. Them was backwards. The B was a balloon, but it was hers. Is this what the town thinks I don't deserve? She whispered. He didn't answer. Just let the question hang there like smoke curling from a doused fire. She stood, then did something she hadn't done since the day the baby stopped kicking. She opened her satchel, the one she kept hidden beneath the bed, and pulled out the only item she'd saved from the fire, a wedding band warped by heat. She placed it on the mantel beside the box. I was someone else once, she said, but she died. Colt stepped beside her. Then who are you now? Marble looked down at the crooked letters on the page. I don't know, she said, but I think the girls do. The thaw had brought mud and murmurs. Fences loosened at their post. Hooves sunk to the fetlocks, but it wasn't the melting snow that stirred tension. It was the town's eyes sharpened by winter's quiet and spring's return. Nothing made people meaner than having something to talk about again. They came just after midday. 3 men on horseback, all neighbors and name only. At their head, Hiram Blass, Colt's nearest rival, oldest grudge holder, and the kind of man who called politeness a weakness when spoken too slowly. He reined in at the McCree gate, mud splattering from his horse's hooves. Colt was chopping wood behind the barn. Marble stood on the porch, brushing sawdust off a quilt. The twins were inside stringing buttons into bracelets. Blast tipped his hat. "Afternoon, Marble." She didn't answer. "You've got some nerve standing on a porch you don't own." Colt rounded the corner before she could speak. He held the axe by its throat, not threatening, just visible. "This a courtesy visit, Hiram." Blast smiled wide. "Call it an act of civic responsibility." "Town's been talking cult. You letting a woman live here who ain't your wife. Children calling her mama when she's got no blood claim. Not illegal," Blast shrugged. "No, but it's irregular, and irregular things don't sit well with folks. People get uneasy. Uneasy people make poor decisions." Marble came down the steps. "What decision is it you're trying to make today?" Blast glanced at her, eyes flicking down to her apron, the boots she'd cleaned that morning. "Just came to ask if you'd be moving along soon. Don't want to see Colt get tied up in gossip." Colt's voice was gravel. "You came with two other men to talk about gossip. Came to protect your interest. Land disputes have a way of reopening if the folks involved start looking too untraditional." Colt stepped closer at the act still low. Hiram continued, "You remember the border lines, don't you? The ones that run near your southern fence, unclear legally speaking. Judge might rule differently if asked again." Colt's eyes were steel. Marble said, "You think this house is less honest because I help in it." Hiram looked past her. "I think little girls deserve mothers whose names are signed in church records." Marble's throat burned, but her voice stayed level. "And you think I haven't earned a name?" Colt dropped the axe gently into the stump. "You're not here about boundaries, Hiram. You're here because your pride can't stomach a man finding peace where you've never had it." Blast's smile dropped. Marble stepped off the porch, walking closer, boots sinking into thawed ground. "You want a paper to feel safe," she said. "You want ink and signatures as if they could ever promise more than actions. I knelt in mud to find a child in a storm. I've washed blood from this man's shirt with my own hands. I've taught 2 girls how to laugh again. But to you, I'm still ash and rumor." Blast shifted in his saddle. "You've said enough." "No," she said. "I haven't said half of it." She reached into her apron, pulled out the locket, opened it, showed him the picture inside. Her husband, the one who died trying to save their child when the fire caught the roof. This was all that survived. Not a name, not a deed, not a house, just this. And you think I'm going to crawl back into nothing just because your pride needs me small." The other men looked away. One cleared his throat. The wind shifted. Colt stepped forward. "You can turn around now, Hiram. You threatening me? No." Colt said, "I'm standing between you and something I won't let you stain." Blaz's jaw worked, but his horse sidestepped. Already tired of the posturing, he spat in the dirt, then turned his reins. "Town's watching. You two better figure out what story you want them to tell." Marble watched them go until they disappeared behind the curve of the trail. Then she turned, her knees shaking, not from fear, but from fury long kept under her ribs. Colt stood silent, the axe still buried in the stump. "You didn't have to say anything," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, I did." She went inside. That night, after the girls were asleep, she sat at the table folding the same towel over and over. Colt came in, took off his coat, and sat across from her. Neither spoke for a long time. "Then they'll come again." "Yes." "Want me to take you to town?" "No. You could stay with the widow Harper or head north to your cousin's place." "I'm not going." His eyes searched hers. "I'm tired of running from people who have never lifted a hand." "Build what they judge," he exhaled. It wasn't quite relief, something closer to recognition. She stood, went to the hearth, and pulled down the bundle. She'd never opened in front of him. Inside her marriage certificate, smoke smeared a ribbon and the child's toy spoon they'd found in the ashes. She laid it on the table. "I didn't just lose a husband and baby," she said. "I lost the name that let people call me real." Colt rose, walked to the shelf, took down his wife's apron, still hanging like a memory. He turned, held it out, not reverently, not symbolically, just honestly. Marble stared at it. "I don't want her place," she whispered. "You've never tried to take it," he said, "but this house needs a woman who doesn't disappear when it gets hard." She took it in her hands. The cloth was soft, worn at the edges, but clean. He stepped closer. "I don't have a ring," he said. "Not yet. But I've got land and 2 girls who believe you're the kind of strong they want to grow into." Marble looked at the apron, then at him. "And what do you believe?" He didn't blink. "That the fire didn't end your life. It prepared it for here." She tied the apron around her waist. Outside, wind scraped against the window. Inside, the fire climbed higher. In the morning, she swept the front steps before the sun rose. She placed 2 wooden birds, hers and Joss's, on the porch rail. At midday, June pulled a button from her pocket and said, "Pa says you'll stay." "I will, and you'll wear the apron." "I am." The girl smiled. "Then it's true." "What's true?" "That when a woman finds her name again, it don't belong to the town anymore." Marble looked out toward the road. It was empty. The snow was melting. And somewhere deep inside, the part of her that had once been nothing but ashes whispered back, "Let them talk."